There's a crazy conspiracy theory connected to The Shining and the moon landing.
Yeah, I heard about the moon landing.
Yeah, and he's the guy that the conspiracy theorists, when they get the most crazy, when they really want to dive into who did it, they think it was all Kubrick.
Hello, my name is Edward. I am a photographer and a video editor. Stanley Kubrick has been dead for 20 years, yet people still bring him up in the same sentence as the Apollo 11 moon mission. Why is there 3 documentaries made on his involvement with the Apollo 11 moon mission? By the end of this video, you will know why, even after 20 years, there is much talk about Stanley Kubrick and the Apollo 11 moon mission. I will split the video into several parts. The first part will be a collection of interviews from colleagues and family members of Stanley Kubrick. The second part of this video will be an assortment of clips from the 2018 documentary series, The Shakespeare Code. It will give you a crash course in what an encrypted message may look like. I will also demonstrate how Stanley Kubrick would have been well aware of the codes in Shakespeare's work. The third part of this video will be a collection of clips from the mockumentary Dark Side of the Moon by William Carroll. It features Christine Kubrick, Buzz Aldrin, Donald Rumsfeld, Henry Kissinger, and an assortment of other political and military figures in America at the time. In this section, I will also be highlighting the well-known and documented psychological phenomenon known as the Streisand effect. The fourth part of this video will be a brief look at the documentary Room 237, a feature-length film made up of a collection of interpretations on Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. It hosts a variety of different opinions, but we will be focusing on 2. Most importantly, a section labelled How The Shining Was Meant to Be Seen. The final part of this video will be the new information I am bringing to the equation. It is the sole reason I am making this video. Before continuing, I will show you a recommended watching list. If you have not watched The Shining or 2001: A Space Odyssey, I will tell you now to stop the video and come back after you have watched them. Without having watched both films, it will be extremely difficult to make sense of what you're about to see. You do not need to watch all of them, as I will include the relevant clips in this video. The first thing we will be doing is looking at the documentary Stanley Kubrick: A Life in Pictures.
One of his pictures are equivalent to 10 of somebody else's.
Do you know him? And nobody ever really knew him.
He was known as a kind of future threat.
One of the all-time great motion picture makers.
A future threat to peace and quiet.
I love him 1 minute, and the next minute I hate him. I could kill him.
Perhaps the most intelligent person I've ever met.
This man was born to push the envelope.
There is still a part of Stanley that's a great mystery to me.
And he always pushed the envelope.
And you must expect someone like that to be different from the rest of us.
Everybody pretty much acknowledges he's the man. And I still feel that underrates him.
An outstanding filmmaker, one of the great artists of our time. Stanley Kubrick was an enigma to many people. In his films, he was extrovert, challenging, and ready to break conventions. But Kubrick himself was intensely private, shunning publicity, and fiercely guarding his anonymity. Happiest at work and at home with his family and a large circle of friends. He was a chess player in every sense, both cautious and aggressive. He took great risks, but evaluated each move with the greatest of care.
Throughout this film, there are many interviews by colleagues and family members of Stanley Kubrick. However, I will be highlighting only a couple which help demonstrate what kind of man Stanley Kubrick was.
But also, what particularly nettled him was the assumption that he wouldn't understand this or wouldn't care about it. And Stanley said, put the camera where I told you, with the lens that I asked for, or get off the set and don't come back.
But nevertheless, Stanley said, from now on, I want to do pictures where I really have final cut.
But the process had also taught him that he had to have full control over his films. As he later told Newsweek, had I known how severe the limitations were going to be, I probably wouldn't have made the film.
As you can see, this is a man who would refuse to work on a picture unless it was done precisely his way.
He's perfectionist, but I mean on a more provable level. I mean, you know, it's different in a movie situation if you say, how was it to the operator? Stanley has the teleprompter now, so he knows. And the amount of reasons that he has why a take is not acceptable. Quintessentially perfectionist.
Jan used a really great expression. He looks under every stone, and then he looks again.
Stanley was the first real perfectionist that I met. I mean, there just wasn't any way for him to go one take less, or he never gave an inch on anything.
Last I heard that Stanley claims that he can find any line in the picture in any take in 20 seconds. He's got 14 playback machines going, I don't know how many recorders.
You know, he had every take on a different television screen with a different computer tower, with different tape unit, different 3/4 inch feed. And he would compare take 1 to take 31 with all these monitors and all these 3/4 inch tape machines. And during Full Metal Jacket, when we talked, he would just rave about how easy it is to compare performance. To compare Lee Ermey's performance on take 5 and then take 25, because he had the monitors right next to each other.
Total gadget freak.
Good. Good.
Other directors, the problem they have is they have a producer looking over their shoulder. That producer's the money guy, because there has to be some sort of control. We've got a certain amount of money, and here's the project. It's all mapped out exactly where this money goes and how much goes for this scene and how many minutes this scene's going to last. Stanley doesn't have that. He doesn't have that producer looking right over his shoulder. Stanley had freedom. He wouldn't even allow a Warner Brothers representative to come on his set while we were filming, period.
And I'm watching this van over there, and those people are just sitting in the van. I said, so who are the people in the van? And then Stanley leaned over and he said, those are the Warner Brothers executives. They're not allowed to get out.
By 1963, Stanley Kubrick had established so high a reputation that he could pick his next project without bowing to the dictates of Hollywood. As a director whose films were both popular and critically acclaimed, he had won an astonishing degree of creative independence. Stanley Kubrick now began work on a film which would establish him as one of the great film directors, with 2001: A Space Odyssey.
I just remember going to the theater and seeing the picture for the first time and feeling that it wasn't a movie. It was the first time that the motion picture form had been changed.
It's hard to realize that when we made that film, we didn't know what the Earth looked like from space for any real distance. All these things had to be imagined.
The special effects in 2001 were a quantum leap forward for the film industry. These looked the real thing.
It was that kind of process of personally taking possession of not only the people, the technology, the art, the craft of making movies. He was it. He embodied the whole thing. After working with Stanley on 2001, I swore I would never work for anybody again, because Stanley was a hell of a taskmaster. He was difficult, he was demanding, his level of quality control was just astronomically near perfection, and I found as a young guy this was very hard. His mind was so insatiable and so active that he could barely sleep, he could barely stop. I saw that Stanley Kubrick worked and lived his work 7 days a week, almost 24 hours a day. And I think probably he had a hard time keeping up with his own intellect.
I think as a director, I think that what we all admired the most was that it was a single vision. It was one man's vision. And no one interfered with that vision, and the complete control that he had in the making of his films, that meant that whatever it had in the back of his head was up there on the screen. And I know that he struggled a lot to get to that place.
In this next scene, we can see Stanley had amassed hundreds and hundreds of boxes of pre-production work in his house. At the time, it included many unseen storyboards and reference shots, which the archivers likened to puzzles and curiosities.
Stanley Kubrick's house is amazingly full of boxes. There are boxes everywhere.
How many boxes would you say there are in total?
I really can't say. I mean, clearly over 1,000. Yeah, but I wouldn't know, because they're all over the place.
Tony and Jan say that some of these boxes haven't been opened for decades.
I kept an eye on these boxes for 4 years nearly. Yes, 4 years now. So.
For Bernd and me, the stuff in these boxes are puzzles and curiosities.
Quote, "We're hearing stories that suggest Kubrick is even more insane than psychiatrists had led us to believe. There's a thin line between being an artistic perfectionist and being a barking loon. Stanley has clearly crossed that line, and then some."
I tell a little to your left and stay there after you move. Okay, aim your gun.
He insists on eating all 3 courses of his dinner simultaneously in the manner of Napoleon, hates being driven faster than 35 miles per hour, and refuses to fly despite having a pilot's license.
Okay, so I'll yell fire when he hops over that concrete.
Stanley was not clinically insane, as Punch suggests. He was not insane. He was one of the smartest men who ever lived.
Did you ever think to yourself, in those 20 years, well, what's he doing in there?
I did. I certainly had visual images of this hermit sitting there pouring through things, but I had no idea why it would take somebody that long, because previously he had been making movies,
one a year.
A year apart, and then it slowed down a bit, but maybe it was me.
Des murs de 2 mètres qui bordent sa propriété.
Non, faut pas exagérer. Non,
c'est comment ça?
Non, c'est une propriété. C'est un homme qui vit à la campagne, qui vit avec sa femme, qui vit avec ses chiens, avec ses chats, qui a 3 filles, qui passe sa vie à travailler et à jouer aux échecs ou à lire des livres. Le prodige, évidemment, c'est qu'il a réussi d'abord à tourner ses films à 15 km de chez lui, pratiquement tous ses films. Il a fait reconstituer l'hôtel de Shining dans Londres, dans la banlieue de Londres. Il n'a pas allé dans le Colorado. Bon, tout est fait en studio. Le prodige, c'est qu'évidemment, tout le montage se fait dans sa propre maison. C'est-à-dire qu'il ne va même pas au studio pour monter. Il monte chez lui. Alors, il traverse le couloir, il va se coucher. C'est que les acteurs, il les sélectionne sur cassette. C'est-à-dire qu'il fait... Tout le monde vient... Il contrôle le monde à partir de sa maison.
You say, well, gee, I wish he'd made more, but these were enough. Because there's so much in each one. There's so much yeah, it would have been nice for him to make more. But that's not the process. That wasn't his process. And what he did make was something that's so special and unique, it's like a different movie every time you see it.
I will be referencing some parts of this documentary again, but for now we will move on to the next part of the video. As we have established, Stanley Kubrick was an extremely intelligent man. He was a keen chess player, and he had a love of code breaking. This can be demonstrated by Stanley Kubrick's adoration of the book The Code Breakers. It is a history of encryption and decryption, and it includes findings on Shakespeare's work which supposedly show steganographic codes inside the original manuscripts. The book The Code Breakers is featured in the documentary The Life of Stanley Kubrick, and it is also mentioned on page 518 in the Stanley Kubrick archives. First, code encryption and decryption was a major topic of personal interest to Stanley Kubrick. Anthony Fruin, personal assistant to Stanley Kubrick for over 20 years, describes on page 518 of the Stanley Kubrick archives book that the 1967 book The Code Breakers, the story of secret writing by David Kahn, was considered by Stanley to be one of the greatest scholarly works of the 20th century. The Code Breakers is a detailed history of message encryption and decryption, and code breaking was a central plot point in Kubrick's film Dr. Strangelove. As Stanley Kubrick praised this book so highly, he would have been aware of the controversy surrounding Shakespeare's original manuscripts. The book The Code Breakers references Shakespeare and Francis Bacon multiple times throughout it, so once again, there should be no doubt that Stanley Kubrick would have been well aware of the information disclosed in this documentary. A Norwegian organist named Peter Admundsen dedicated much time into looking into these supposed ciphers.
Imagine a country where many people have become convinced that much of what we know about William Shakespeare is wrong.
En norsk ekspert engasjert for å finne ut om Shakespeares diktning egentlig
Inside of this documentary, it breaks down some classical encryptions that have been used throughout history. He has worked extensively on this project for many years, and he has gained much support in his country of Norway, and has also recently had a documentary made on his findings.
An acrostic is where the first letter of each line spells out a message.
This may open doors.
Sure. Historically, there were strict conventions for printing poems. Each line of verse should begin with a capital letter. In this case, there seems to be a huge typographical error. The lowercase w should be an uppercase letter.
Any ideas what can I do with the TWO in that book?
Well, you can turn to page 2, presumably.
That is one idea. Let's see what happens. We have TWO here, and also a repetition of lowercase w. It should have been a capital one.
Right. But I mean, where does that take us? Are we looking for acrostics that say 3 or 5 now in the margins?
And then we could go to
yeah, right.
But see the margins, yes, because what I discovered was this F bacon.
I see. Right. So you okay? So Francis Bacon has often been put forward as the true author of Shakespeare's works. He was a brilliant man, fascinated by codes and ciphers, well-travelled and multilingual, who combined a stellar legal and political career with writing works of science and philosophy, and he was the greatest English essayist of his age. Just as with modern-day computers, there has always been a need for protecting sensitive information.
As a wordsmith, William Shakespeare chose to leave his encrypted messages inside of his literature. As Stanley Kubrick was a film director, he would have chose to leave his encrypted messages inside of his videos. I believe there are interchangeable components inside both encryptions, which is why I am showing you this documentary.
Most apparent because it's right at the edge of the door, and it's the largest one that you can see, and it's the last one you can see as the camera moves past it, is one of the 7 dwarfs, and it happens to be Dopey. Okay. Subsequently, after Danny has passed out, Wendy and the pediatrician leave Danny's room, and as they do, they of course go out his door, and you again see the door, the open door with all the cartoon characters on it. And Dopey isn't there. Now, again, continuity error? I don't think so.
As I've previously mentioned, Stanley Kubrick would have been well aware of the supposed codes inside William Shakespeare's work, demonstrated by his love of the book Codebreakers. Francis Bacon and William Shakespeare are mentioned multiple times throughout this book. It would be implausible to think Stanley Kubrick would have not been aware of these codes. There is a glaring and obvious continuity error that appears in Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. There is a Disney Dopey sticker on Danny's bedroom door, but it is removed in the next scene with no explanation. This is a massive continuity error, and I believe, similar to the work in Shakespeare, it was done on purpose. There are many examples of these kind of errors, but we will only be focusing on a couple for the sake of time. Whilst Danny is wearing his Apollo 11 jumper, the carpet flips from under him. Once again, a massive continuity error. And in this scene we can see the chairs and the wind vents have been removed and placed back in between takes.
What do you want me to do about it?
Oh, come on, honey. Don't be so grouchy.
I'm not being grouchy. I just want to finish my work.
We can also note that this looks like a custom-made sticker, furthering the importance of it. The Dopey that we know from Snow White is always dressed in his signature green cloak and purple hat. The sticker in The Shining uses a yellow cloak and an orange hat. I am also self-aware. I know what I look like when showing people this.
See? You see? Well, you don't see it. He moves! Right there! Wait! Right there! Coincidence? I think not!
This was done on purpose.
In code history, deliberate errors in a text are often a hint, a clue for readers in the know to keep searching.
A massive continuity error like this would have not gone overlooked. We can prove this by showing the next interview as an example.
It's big, but it's still ain't nothing but a kitchen.
Do you remember the repetitive, the mini takes?
Kind of. I think the reason I do is because there was a bowl of ice cream.
But it was like a few days later, somebody said, oh, we went through 5 gallons of chocolate ice cream. The continuity would be, if you had to stop and start again, you got a new bowl of ice cream. And not being able to eat it all, something to that effect. You know, a 5-year-old's mind was, hey, look at all this ice cream.
This continuity error will be a crucial key in deciphering the puzzle that Kubrick has left us inside of his films. The importance of this happening under the rainbow cannot be understated. I will now prove that this was not just some silly mistake, as Stanley Kubrick repeated this error in his final film, Eyes Wide Shut. In Stanley's 13th and final film before his death, we have the rainbow costume shop in which another continuity error occurs. We can see in the costume shop window that the third mannequin changes costumes between takes. It starts with a white costume and then it goes to a black costume. As we can see in this scene, Kubrick instructs the actor to look under a rainbow sign.
What is it?
Stanley also wrote in these lines of dialogue: just think of all they miss.
Just think of all they miss.
Where the rainbow ends.
Where the rainbow ends.
This next scene seems like a pretty clear instruction. One of the actresses turns around and says, just think of all they miss. And then the following actress turns around and says, we should go to the end of the rainbow.
But I bet they work too hard. Just think of all they miss.
You're probably right. Now, ladies, where exactly are we going? Exactly.
Where the rainbow ends.
Where the rainbow ends.
Don't you want to go where the rainbow ends?
Well, now that depends where that is.
Well, let's find out.
So we have a repetition of a continuity error occurring with a rainbow and multiple cues within the film telling us to either go to the end of the rainbow or look at the end of the rainbow. This is clearly directing us to look under the rainbow and see if anything is missing. An interesting fact is the first colour film and the most famous film about rainbows was made on the 237th day of the year. This will gain more importance as this documentary goes on. I will be coming back to why these continuity errors have been placed deliberately by Kubrick after showing some backstory and related media to do with this. I will start by showing some clips from the documentary Dark Side of the Moon. But before I do, I will be showing a short clip which explains what the Streisand effect is. The term was first coined in 2003 when Barbra Streisand asked a magazine publisher to recall all the issues which featured a picture of her luxurious mansion. She did this because she didn't want the public knowing where she was living. Due to the lawsuit, it had an opposite effect and the image was shared throughout the internet and on news clips. The term was created in 2003, but the knowledge can be traced back to Lao Tzu over 2,000 years ago.
The phenomena takes place when an attempt to hide, suppress, or censor certain information leads to a ripple effect of unintended, extensive publicity of the information. The Streisand effect is a vivid example of psychological resistance, wherein once people are aware that some information is being kept from them, they are significantly more determined to access and share that information. This evidently implies that when you try so hard to hide something, it just makes it more visible, especially if you're a superstar. Efforts to suppress a juicy piece of online information can backfire and end up making things worse for the would-be censor, The Economist. Attempts to censor information are often made through seizing and desisting of letters, but instead of being suppressed, the information receives exorbitant publicity, as well as media coverage in the form of videos and spoof songs.
So now that we know what the Streisand effect is, the next thing I will be showing is clips from the 2002 documentary Dark Side of the Moon.
And there's a fake documentary, not a real documentary, but a fake, like a mockumentary, where he's admitting and people are talking about. Have you seen that one?
No, but that makes sense.
Yeah, a lot of people are like, dude, you didn't even know there's an actual real interview with him where he admits that he faked the moon landing. But it's not.
Yeah.
It's fake, but it's...
Donald Rumsfeld was the first to propose Stanley Kubrick. The film would have to be perfect, but the set could never be built in time. The filming of 2001: A Space Odyssey was drawing to a close in a suburb of London. Why not use the sets there?
I talked to the president, and Kissinger supported it.
And at first I didn't take it very seriously, and I was told not to take it very seriously. Then it kept going on and on and on.
I told Mr. Nixon it's very dangerous to lie in the United States. You can't pull a con like that in a democracy. Too many people would talk. It would be absurd. But he said, almost sadly, go ahead anyway. Rumsfeld offered to go and negotiate personally with Stanley Kubrick. He and Henry Kissinger flew to England that same evening. Kubrick was surprised and amused by the idea, but began by refusing. Rumsfeld wouldn't give up. In the end, Kubrick agreed. The fake footage would be shot in England in the MGM studios near Boreham Wood with a skeleton crew. The 2 technicians and 2 actors would be CIA agents. To guarantee their trustworthiness, all had to be single men without family ties. They would sign a contract committing themselves to perpetual silence about the whole affair. Once the filming was over, they would have to disappear. But Stanley Kubrick was a perfectionist. Faced with the CIA crew's lack of professionalism, he ended up, against his better judgment, supervising the shooting of the fake moonwalk. But, he told them, from Monday morning, you're out of my life for good.
My goodness, that is somebody. He is impressive, and he is a balanced, rational man. And he also has some courage to say that, what he'd said. And from there on, it played out exactly as he suggested.
He had very great common sense. He was a very dedicated personality, and my relations with him were wonderful.
Kissinger was the key person, yeah, that's right.
And he was very much challenged by this project.
That did take a long time, but everybody was very interested that it could be done at all.
I mean, we have never done this like this. True, yes, we haven't. So that's one reason to try.
They tried and tried, and it didn't look right. I remember the thing with the stars. They had huge sheets of paper, and there were little pinholes.
Everybody should realize what an achievement it was to do that.
Kissinger was so nervous that he packed his passport, in a big suitcase and things like that. He was very unlike himself.
It finally worked, and Kissinger was very, very, very pleased with the result. It looked fantastic.
Henry Kissinger, Donald Rumsfeld, the White House and the CIA had promised Stanley Kubrick he would never hear from them again. They kept their word. But 5 years after the fake footage had been shot, Kubrick was imprudent enough to contact the White House and then NASA to ask to borrow a special lens for the filming of Barry Lyndon. NASA agreed in exchange for services rendered.
For the cans, these were the ones developed for NASA. See how big they are? These were developed by NASA.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, God, they weigh a ton. And the reason why they're so big is because they're used for maximum intake of light. They have a 0.7 of f-stop on this. And these, in fact, were developed for space photography.
NASA agreed in exchange for services rendered. Or perhaps it capitulated to the barely veiled threat of revelations about Armstrong and Aldrin's first steps on the moon. Nixon had resigned following Watergate, but his successor, urged on by the CIA's new director, got the machine up and running again. After all, Stanley Kubrick was the last direct witness of the hoax still living. His telephone was bugged and his mail was intercepted. Kubrick decided to disappear. He made all his films on or near his property, whether the setting was Vietnam or New York. He locked himself away with his wife and children, and never went out again until his death.
I am fully aware this is meant to be a spoof and meant to make a big joke of the whole idea of Stanley Kubrick having anything to do with the Apollo 11 mission. We will now be taking a look at the assortment of other movies and media which highlights this very particular subject. The film was released in 2015 and the plot revolves around the American government going to ask Stanley Kubrick for his help in filming the Apollo 11 moon mission. This is only one of many films which feature this exact same plot.
We've been planning our 11th Apollo mission to the moon in 10 days' time. We still don't have a clue whether the thing's gonna make it or not. So here's the plan. Meet with Kubrick, convince him. You know, film a pretend moon landing.
Johnson Brother Films. I believe you were expecting my visit regarding Mr. Stanley Kubrick.
You just said, now you know how that CIA guy must have felt. What CIA guy?
You know, the American, the guy whose money it was, wanted to do the whole fake moon landing thingy.
What are you going on about, Leon?
You know, the Americans want to do a secret fake moon landing in case the real one doesn't work. That's why they wanted Stanley Kubrick.
You're fucking joking me.
The next film will be by one of Stanley's good friends and colleagues, and he was asked, above all others, to do a speech for him at the Oscars the year Stanley Kubrick died.
He wanted to take us places we could never have imagined, and so he imagined them for us. He is Stanley Kubrick. He died before he could witness the century he had already made famous with 2001: A Space Odyssey. Stanley wanted us to see his movies absolutely as he envisioned them. He never gave an inch on that. He dared us to have the courage of his convictions. And when we take that dare, we're transported directly to his world and we're inside his vision. And in the whole history of movies, there's been nothing like that vision ever. It was a vision of hope and wonder, of grace and of mystery. It was a gift to us, and now it's a legacy. We will be challenged and nourished by that for as long as we keep the courage to take his dare. And I hope that will be long after we've said our thanks and our goodbyes.
In this speech, Steven Spielberg tells us that Stanley Kubrick wanted us to watch his films exactly the way he intended for us. And he also mentions that it is up to us, the public, to have the courage to take his dare. The film's plot, in a nutshell, revolves around a game producer who, upon his death, reveals he has left a series of encryptions and Easter eggs within his game. The book that this was adapted from has no mention of Stanley Kubrick or The Shining throughout it. However, this movie features both of them. Steven Spielberg rewrote whole sections of dialogue and scenes to incorporate his late friend Stanley Kubrick. Steven Spielberg had multiple sets to choose from, which were already in the book. Why go through all the trouble to incorporate Stanley in this movie?
Luke. Ticking clock.
Okay, so I'm estimating about 5 minutes to find the key.
Yeah, there's so many keys in The Shining though. Where do we start?
Maybe there's another reason why Steven Spielberg wanted to include Stanley in a film all about a producer leaving hidden messages and encryptions inside of their work. In the past decade, many people have been looking at Stanley Kubrick's The Shining in great detail since Room 237 was released. It is not just Room 237 which references codes within The Shining. A much better resource to research this topic would be the website www.allez.com. The site condenses multiple years worth of research by multiple researchers into a book's worth of content. Researchers have even been dedicated enough to fly out to England to follow the coordinates left inside of The Shining. The coordinates led them to a NATO military base less than 20 minutes from Stanley Kubrick's house. The documentary Room 237 showcases many people's interpretations of The Shining. A few may differ on their interpretations, but all agree that the film has an underlying mystery to it. The documentary Room 237 has gained some notoriety, even getting critics from the Rolling Stone magazine and Time magazine to review it. It would be hard to believe Steven Spielberg has no idea of this controversy surrounding Stanley Kubrick and The Shining. When watching this film, knowing the information presented in Room 237, it becomes clear that Steven Spielberg saw a similarity between the game producer in this film and the film producer, Stanley Kubrick. There are too many similarities in the plot of this film and the content inside of Room 237 to pass it off as coincidence, especially when we take into consideration Steven Spielberg's close relationship with Stanley Kubrick. Some notable similarities in the film and Room 237, the fact that the game producer writes himself as Jack Torrance in the movie The Shining. We can see that the game producer writes himself as Jack Torrance by placing himself in the ballroom photograph and using his head instead of Jack Nicholson's. In Room 237, there is a theory that Stanley Kubrick wrote Jack Torrance as himself, where we hear that many believe that Jack Nicholson's character is a representation of Stanley Kubrick. This is expanded upon by researchers also pointing out that the hotel manager in The Shining is an eerily similar representation of the former president of the United States, JFK, or John F. Kennedy. So when Jack Torrance has the interview with the hotel manager, some researchers believe this is a representation of Stanley Kubrick being interviewed by John F. Kennedy.
Wendy, that is just so typical of you. Don't you know I have obligations to my employers? Do you have any idea what a contract is? Do you know what an agreement is? Jack Nicholson's whole tirade against his wife, that's Stanley. That's Stanley telling his wife that, after she discovered what he was doing, which was the Apollo footage.
So both Stanley, the film producer, and the game producer in this film secretly write themselves as Jack Torrance. We will be going over parts of Room 237 later in the documentary. I am only showing you this as a reference that there is a lot of controversy surrounding Stanley Kubrick leaving messages inside of his films, very similar to the plot of Ready Player One. The fact that he didn't use any of the scenes available in the book and rewrote it to include Kubrick's work should be very telling. So in Ready Player One, to complete the game producer's task, the player must collect 3 keys. All 3 of these tasks are tied into theories which are shown in Room 237. In the first task, we see that the producer gives the hint that they need to play the race in reverse to get to the end of it.
Go back! 10 seconds!
Why can't we go backwards for once? Backwards. Really fast. Fast as we can. Really put the pedal to the metal, Bill and Ted did it.
In the documentary Room 237, it mentions playing the film backwards, or in reverse, to understand the true meaning of it.
The Shining was a film meant to be seen forwards and backwards. And he didn't mean at the same time, the things forwards and backwards happen throughout the film, and that people walk backwards in the film, people talk backwards.
Spielberg then uses Kubrick's The Shining as the stage to complete the next task and get the next clue, which is when we see the photograph of the game producer writing himself as Jack Torrance. We also hear in this scene, in the dialogue, that one of the characters says, maybe the key isn't a key at all.
The key isn't a key at all.
And as we have learned earlier from the Shakespeare Code, purposeful errors left inside of one's work can be a key that opens doors.
This may open doors.
So when they say Maybe the key isn't a key at all. This can be a clear reference to the continuity errors that Kubrick left inside The Shining. And to complete the final task, the player must play through a retro video game and discover the first Easter egg ever created.
You see, Warren Robinette was proud of adventure. He wanted people to know who was behind it. That's why he created the first digital Easter egg.
That's when you found the first Easter egg ever put in a video game. The creator's name.
As we are talking about a film producer and not a game producer, we can take this as a reference to an Easter egg being left in a retro film. As Toy Story is the first ever digital film, any Easter egg left inside of it would be the first ever digital Easter egg left inside of a film.
He wanted people to know who was behind it. That's why he created the first digital Easter egg.
It just so happens that Toy Story is full of Easter eggs and references to Stanley Kubrick. So just to clarify, as Toy Story is the first digital film ever made, any Easter egg left inside of it would be the first ever digital Easter egg left inside of a film. We should also remind ourselves about what the plot of Toy Story is. The plot of Toy Story revolves around a toy space ranger coming to terms with the fact he can't actually fly and he has never been to space. In this film, it references Stanley Kubrick's carpet, in which the Apollo 11 rocket takes off. So at the exact moment Buzz learns he cannot fly and he has never been to space, we can see the editors at Disney chose to use Stanley Kubrick's carpet for when he has this epiphany.
We did not want to do a musical. We did not want to do a fairy tale. We did not want to do what Disney was from Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast and all those films. They had their thing going, and we wanted to be different.
All right, men, you heard him. Code Red, repeat. We are at Code Red. Recon Plan Charlie, execute. Let's move, 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 move. You will not laugh. You will not cry. You will learn by the numbers. I will teach you. Where is your honor, dirtbag? You are an absolute disgrace. You don't deserve to hate.
So at the exact time Buzz has the epiphany that he cannot fly and he has never been to space, we see the editors at Disney chose to use Stanley Kubrick's carpet for when Buzz has this realization.
In my silver ship I sail, dream it ended too soon. Now I know exactly who I am and what I'm here for. You are a toy you can't fly.
The carpet pattern upstairs in Sid's house in Toy Story, straight out of the Overlook Hotel. Although Unkrich takes no credit for that, he wishes he could. It being the work of production designer, fellow Shining fan, Ralph Eggleston. We can also note that Buzz's catchphrase, to infinity and beyond, is a play on words to 2001 A Space Odyssey, Jupiter and Beyond the Infinite.
To infinity and beyond.
What is it, Mom? Mom, where are you?
I can get through this.
Oh, I'm a sham!
Shh, look at me. I can't even fly out of a window. But the hat looked good. Tell me the hat looked good. The apron is a bit much.
Out the window, Buzz! You're a genius! Come on, this way!
Years of academy training wasted.
We can also see that a continuity error occurs under the rainbow in this film as well.
And there seems to be no sign of intelligent life anywhere.
Hello!
They seem to relish the idea at Pixar of doing something difficult and then seeing how to solve the problems in a creative and entertaining way.
Quick!
So as we can see in this scene, The A11 can stand for Apollo 11. We have a 3 remainder on the license plate.
And we fished around for it for a while, and the thing that finally did it for me, I'm a big fan of Stanley Kubrick and his films, and Stanley Kubrick has this kind of recurring visual motif through his films that people call the Kubrick stare, and it's just an angle of the head tilted forward and the eyes peering out from under the brow line. And it's a very iconic thing that shows up in nearly all of Kubrick's films, and that's what I ended up pushing the animators towards with this kind of demo buzz here, because it very quickly communicates a darkness inside.
It has been an honor serving with you. Good luck, folks.
You're gonna need it.
No, wait!
The house that Andy moved into is 234 Elm Street. So if we take the 3 remainder on the license plate and add it to the house number, we get 237. We have A11 and 237.
Perfect, Woody, it's nice. See, the door has a rainbow on it.
1, 2, 2, 5, 6, Who's Star 237?
Oh, that's just a dinosaur toy down the street. That's nothing.
Here we have a repetition of the 3 and the 234, which gives us 237.
Your real problem's the monkey. The monkey's the eye in the sky. He sees everything. Classroom.
We have to slow this one down as it is only on the screen for a few frames. The hotel in The Shining is called the Overlook Hotel. We can see on the CCTV camera it says Overlook H237.
I can't believe you never brought me up here. Tennis whites?
I know.
Mission to Mars.
Check this out.
The original film that seemed to spark this controversy is James Bond, Diamonds Are Forever. The set designer was Ken Adams. Ken Adams was a good friend and colleague of Stanley Kubrick. The film includes an out-of-place moon landing scene in a military base, in which James Bond stumbles upon, which serves no plot purpose whatsoever. We also have proof that Stanley Kubrick has worked on James Bond sets with Ken Adams in secret.
So I rang up Stanley and said, would you be prepared to come to Pinewood? I said, you must be crazy. He said, I want another film. If anybody sees me at Pinewood, if Claude finds out about it, it's going to be... I said, Stanley, I will guarantee you that there will be nobody on the set. You come on a Sunday morning, I have the key to the stage, there'll be only you and me and nobody else. He spent 4 hours with me, came in his Mercedes, setting all the source lighting, all the practical lights on that.
Himself.
It was amazing, to do that. With the fear of possibly being discovered or something, But that was friendship.
Bill Kaysing was the first person to make this link in 1981 when he released his book, America's $30 Billion Swindle, We Never Went to the Moon. This seems to be the first written reference of someone linking Stanley Kubrick to the Apollo 11 moon mission.
I had an E-Type Jaguar, a very fast car, and so he told me he wanted me to drive him to and from Shepperton's studio, but at not more than 30 miles an hour. And it is amazing, you know, when you drive with a director for about, I suppose, 5 months, every day for an hour and a half to and from a studio, you get to know each other pretty well. And as a result, there's no question that he was the director I had the closest working relationship with. And, you know, we discussed everything.
Here is another film with the exact same plot, which we have already discussed, with Stanley Kubrick being asked by the American government to fake the Apollo 11 moon footage. So far we have Dark Side of the Moon, Moonwalkers, and Operation Avalanche, which all boast this exact same plot.
Currently, we are finishing Operation Deep Red, the probe into film director Stanley Kubrick.
I would never normally do this, but it's for a friend. His name is Matt. Oh my God.
Excuse me? How'd you set this up?
All right, it's called front screen projection. Stanley Kubrick can fake any environment he wants by projecting it through a semi-transparent mirror and then onto a gigantic silver screen. Then he films the entire scene through the same mirror at a 90-degree angle to the projector. What it winds up doing is creating images where you can't tell where the stage stops and the fake photographic background begins. And that's the easy part. We also need to convince everybody at NASA. The good news is the only people who are in contact with the rocket are all in one room in Houston, inside Mission Control. If we can convince Mission Control that what they're doing is real, everybody else will follow.
A movie released earlier this year also features the plot of the American government and NASA lying about what happened with the Apollo 11 mission. Someone in the production team purposefully chose Kubrick's carpet to be the wallpaper in 2 of the sets in this film. So we have another link to Apollo 11 and Kubrick.
You're telling me that the moon was effectively the biggest cover-up in human history?
Biggest, probably.
In breaking news, NASA has just corrected their initial projection of the moon's path over Earth. The governor has just ordered the mass evacuation of the entire West Coast, recommending that people urgently head to higher ground.
What's wrong?
Can't reach my son. Where does, you're an astronaut?
The next reference to Kubrick will come from the popular TV show, The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. It features an event occurring under the rainbow which causes reality to fall apart. After this happens, it shows us Kubrick's 2001 Stargate sequence. And then following this, we see 2 different cartoon shows cross over. This may not seem relevant right now, but throughout this documentary, this will make sense in why I included it.
Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby.
Reality is falling apart! What's gonna happen to us? I don't know, but I'm gonna hold you tight and never let go. I love you, Grim. What about me, y'all? You'll be fine.
So as a reminder, in this homage to Kubrick, right after an event happens under the rainbow, we see 2 different cartoons cross over into one.
Okay, we keep flying, we never head back, we never talk about this again.
Yep. Uh-huh.
And so, once again, the day is saved, thanks to Billy, Mandy, and Grim.
Following this, we can also see that The Simpsons has referenced this very particular inside gag. Inside of this special, we can see multiple of Kubrick's films interacting over a chessboard. It then pans out to Kubrick in an editing suite, and next to him is the Apollo 11 moon footage and the number 237. After we see the films interacting over the chessboard, it pans out to Stanley Kubrick in his editing suite, and next to him we can see Apollo 11 moon footage, and we also see the number 237.
All right, let's burn this, let's rewrite everything, and let's start all over. Ow.
Stanley Kubrick died in 1999, 6 days after showing his final cut of Eyes Wide Shut to the Warner Bros. Executives. Since then, there has been a constant and steady stream of media surrounding the topic of Stanley Kubrick and the Apollo 11 moon mission.
Eyes low, chin, heavy shoegazer. Moonwalking, R.I.P. Stanley Kubrick. Moonwalking, R.I.P. Stanley Kubrick.
If we have learned anything from the Barbra Streisand effect, it should tell us that this can be a very good way of censoring information. If people do not feel like it is being hidden from them, and it is put in plain sight, they will not go after the information. So now that we've had a little bit of backstory, let me divulge into what this video is actually about. There is a theory that inside of Stanley Kubrick's films, there are encryptions, ergo, a hidden message.
Kubrick was a strange guy.
Yeah,
do you know he would do complex mathematics in his spare time?
Really?
Yeah, he's like a legitimate genius.
Wow.
And he would put all sorts of like weird hidden meaning into all of his movies. Like a thing was never just a thing. Like there's a big crazy conspiracy about The Shining that inside of it is all sorts of information that it relates to the moon landing.
Yeah.
You know
like
that?
the room
like
the
kid
room
has
in the
Apollo
hotel.
shirt.
It was
Yeah.
room 127, and the moon is 127,000 miles from the Earth or something.
No, it's like 237.
Whatever it was.
The moon is like 200. I think it's room 237, right?
Here is a basic example of some of the things in which people believe Stanley has placed within his films intentionally with hidden meaning behind them. Stanley has placed a photo of a rocket launch on a fridge. The Native American art tapestries resemble rockets. In the paper Jack Torrance is writing, it repeatedly says, "All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy." As we will soon find out, the ALL can be interchangeable with A11. There are multiple props which feature the eagle in the film The Shining, but most importantly, the typewriter which Jack Torrance writes A11 repeatedly on is the brand Adler, which is German for eagle. So Jack Torrance is writing on his eagle typewriter A11, A11, A11 repeatedly. As we can see on Danny's sweater, it features an Apollo 11 rocket. We can also see that the carpet that Danny is sat on matches the Apollo launch site. In the book that The Shining was adapted from, the original room number was 217. So Stanley purposefully changed the room number from 217 to 237 to match the average distance from the Earth to the moon. Stanley also features a prop, which was designed specifically for astronauts. 7 Apollo missions went to the moon, but only 6 landed. As we can see, Stanley has placed 6 crates of 7 Up in this scene. The next part of this video essay will be some extracts from the documentary Room 237. Even though the majority of the documentary is nonsensical ramblings, there are a few gems of information scattered amongst it. Most importantly, there is a section titled How The Shining Was Meant to Be Seen.
Okay. Yeah, I was, obsessed with The Shining and reading all the online analyses of it. And was particularly a big fan of the Mastermind's lengthy analysis of it. And he had one phrase that kind of stuck in my mind, that The Shining was a film meant to be seen forwards and backwards. And he didn't mean at the same time. The things forwards and backwards happen throughout the film, and that people walk backwards in the film, people talk backwards. There's a really cool part where, the helicopters are following his car, and his name scrolls up in the credits and meets the car right in the same position where the grid of photographs, right in that photograph that he's trapped in. So his car, his name, and his photograph all line up for 1 second.
I will quickly interject to say that I tried to replicate what I seen on Room 237. I will demonstrate shortly how far off the clips aligned are. Others have been intrigued by this, and you can see on YouTube there are multiple videos on this subject. The following extract comes from a 27-part series on YouTube, which analyses every little detail The Shining has inside of it.
You've probably never watched a film forwards and backwards before. This came from the infamous 2012 documentary Room 237, and was the part of that film that captured my imagination the most.
So, intrigued by watching these things, I decided to try it for myself. I proceeded to watch The Shining and another copy side by side at the same time. Many people have mirrored The Shining against itself, or watched the film in reverse. However, I do not believe people have lined it up correctly. Here on the screen, you will see how I lined it up. I know many people will not be familiar with video editing software, so I will try and explain this simply. The bottom track will be The Shining reversed. The top track will be The Shining played normally. In the credits, there is a 10-second gap which reads The End. I play the original version after this 10-second screen of The End finishes. The mirror of The End would be the start. I tried to line it up as I seen on Room 237, but immediately I could tell that I would not be able to do it. As in Room 237, it looks like they've mixed and matched random clips together. I checked myself, and I could not see how they come to this conclusion.
So his car, his name, and his photograph all line up for 1 second.
In the photo, Jack Torrance is holding a message in his hand. You need to zoom in to see it, but it is a little white envelope, or note. On the opposite screen, it reads, The Interview. If you mirror the films against each other, they do not match up the way it is shown on Room 237.
So his car, his name, and his photograph all line up for 1 second.
There is at least a 3-minute discrepancy in the clips what they have shown. Amused by the discrepancy, I decided to watch the rest of The Shining as I had lined it up. When watching the movie side by side, I noticed many synchronicities, as it said I would in Room 237. I will show some parts that stuck out on my first viewing. There are many more, but for the sake of time, I will only include some. I will have to mute some of the clips to avoid copyright claims on this video, but I have given you all the tools you need to replicate this if you so choose. Some of the synchronicities are vague. Some of the synchronicities are very clear. The next one is much clearer and has more components. On one screen, you can see it says closing day. On the opposite screen, you will see Danny opening the door. As both the car and Danny come into screen, they both start travelling down a narrow path on a green landscape. This is one continuous scene I did not cut together. Both Danny and the car are travelling down a narrow path in a green landscape, and then both cut to a car driving.
Why can't we go backwards for once? Backwards, really fast as we can. Really put the pedal to the metal, you know? Bill and Ted did it.
In this next scene, you will see both Wendy and Jack looking over a desk, and if you watch closely, it looks like Jack moves from one screen to the other. We can also see the pan transition using the wall is continued from the left screen onto the right screen. Then, as Jack throws the ball and catches it on the right scene, we see Wendy turn around, swinging a bat on the left scene. Finally, we see Jack fade from the right scene into the left scene.
How do you like it? How do you like it?
In the next very famous scene, you will see Jack continually pointing to his chest. In the mirrored scene, you will see Jack Torrance wearing an Eagle t-shirt, and the camera pans in and out of the mirror.
Have you ever thought for a single solitary moment about my responsibilities to my employers? Has it ever occurred to you that I have agreed to look after the Overlook Hotel until May the 1st? Does it matter to you at all that the owners have placed their complete confidence and trust in me, and that I have signed a letter of agreement, a contract, in which I have accepted that responsibility? Do you have the slightest idea what a moral and ethical principle is, do you? Has it ever occurred to you what would happen to my future if I were to fail to live up to my responsibilities? Has it ever occurred to you? Has it?
Stay away from me.
Are you out of your fucking mind?
No. It's the truth, really. I swear, Daddy told me. He went up into one of the bedrooms. The door was open and he saw this crazy woman in the bathtub. She tried to strangle him.
This next scene will be the midpoint of the film.
Which room was it?
And you will be able to see a lampshade, a naked woman appear 3 times in a row across the mirrored scenes.
While Miami continues to swelter in a record winter heat wave, bringing temperatures to the mid and upper 90s, the central and Rocky Mountain states are buried in snow. Colorado, 10 inches of snow is falling in just a few hours tonight. Travel in the Rockies is almost impossible. Airports are shut down, stranding thousands of passengers. Highways are blocked by snowdrifts. Railroad tracks are frozen. Officials in Colorado tell Newswatch at least 3 people have been killed by exposure to freezing winds. The governor of Colorado is expected tomorrow to declare a weather emergency. The National Guard might be called out to clear more snow and heavy winds tonight and tomorrow, with temperatures dropping well below zero. Back here in South Florida, we've got just the opposite problem. The heat and humidity are supposed to climb. Look.
So after crossing the midpoint, the scenes would be flipped, and this is what it would look like. On the following scenes, we will hear a ringing noise and see it accompanied by a zoom. As we can see, Wendy answers her ringing phone as it zooms on the opposite screen. When these scenes are mirrored, we can hear a ringing noise on the mirrored version at the same time Wendy answers her phone. Now, as both scenes include this ringing noise, let's see what happens when we include a zoom on both screens as well. In the photo, Jack Torrance is holding a message in his hand. You need to zoom in to see it, but it is a little white envelope, or note. On the opposite screen, it reads, "The Interview." I have not included all the synchronicities, because throughout this video essay, you will see all of the video side by side lined up, with the addition of more information very soon. I was entertained by the similarities, correlations and synchronicities I seen in the two films lined up, but I still felt something was missing from it. Before going on to the next part of the video, I would like to take a quick detour and look at a film many are familiar with. It may be worth noting it was also released 3 years after Stanley Kubrick's death. The reason I will be showing it is due to the similarities in the theories of The Shining and Stanley Kubrick and Spy Kids. The most notable similarities are the plot revolves around a CIA operative which is being held prisoner. Both CIA operatives are represented as monsters. Even though he's a prisoner, he is still allowed on TV and to produce media. The operative's speech is censored and he is forced to communicate by talking backwards. Not completely unrelated to Kubrick, as it features an actor used on his last project before his death, Alan Cumming.
And then when they came back down, Mr. Nightingale tried to pass me an envelope, but they saw it and took it away and said that...
Now returns Flukes. Please.
Junie, why did you watch that show?
Because it's cool. Why?
Because that's all you ever do. Played video games and watch the tapes. You know why, son?
So always remember, whatever you do, always do your retina. Remembers you always.
You see how wonderful it is.
I want you all to meet Donna. Fight.
Dad, when Flute makes a toy out of that one, I want it. Honey? Anna! You know.
Don't you know I have obligations to my employers? Do you have any idea what a contract is? Do you know what an agreement is? Jack Nicholson's whole tirade against his wife, that's Stanley. That's Stanley telling his wife that, you know, after she discovered what he was doing, which was the Apollo footage.
I was entertained by the similarities, correlations and synchronicities I seen in the two films lined up, but I still felt something was missing from it. Expanding on Room 237 further, there is a section which describes how the start of 2001: A Space Odyssey and the ending of The Shining are very similar.
If you reverse the film, it has a format similar to 2001, all these kind of things, how at the end of the Shining, he's reduced to a screaming ape, just like in the beginning of 2001, they're screaming apes.
There, in the record rack, is a copy of 2001, which is obviously is a great joke, but also he's also talking about a film director who has given up being influenced by others, a film director whose primary influence has become himself.
At this point, I had not watched 2001: A Space Odyssey, so I proceeded to do that. Immediately after finishing the film, I threw it into the video editing software. There was one scene in particular that stuck out in my head that I wanted to see what it would look like if I lined it up with the work I previously did. As I lined up 2001: A Space Odyssey to The Shining, I realised the point I was matching it to was directly after the credits end, where it reads the interview and there's a note in Jack Torrance's hand.
Wasn't that fast? Considering the way the world was moving so quickly at the time, this just said, no, I want you to see something. I'm going to take you through something you never thought you'd ever experience.
And he began working on a new kind of film, a film that had never been made before, a film that was made by a bored genius who had thoroughly emptied the jug of everything that could be done in filmmaking, and he was looking for the next thing.
It's not that he wanted to show off, I'm so different than you, but he said, why does every story have to be told the same way? He would tell me the last couple of years of his life, when we were talking about the form, he kept saying, I want to change the form. I want to make a movie that changes the form. And I said, well, didn't you do that with 2001? He said, just a little bit, but not enough. I really want to change the form. So he kept looking for different ways to tell stories.
Should we try it? Let's give it a crack.
Come on, Germany.
It is worth noting in this scene that we pan out from the 11th photo in the wall, and the candles form an 11 either side of the eagle we can see on the opposite screen. So as a reminder, many people believe that Jack Nicholson's character is a representation of Stanley, and the hotel manager a representation of JFK. So in this scene we would be seeing Stanley being interviewed by JFK. As 2001 starts, we will see the moon pan away from the earth. As this happens, we can see an eagle in the window behind the hotel manager. It is hidden behind his head, but as we can see in the mirrored scenes, the eagle has been highlighted. So as Stanley walks in to be interviewed by JFK, we will see an eagle on top of a moon, and then an eagle on top of the earth, and the words written under it, a Stanley Kubrick production. I will fast forward so you can see I have not cut and edited things together.
I'll explain that our season here runs from May 15th to October 30th. Then we close down completely until the following May.
Do you mind if I ask why you do that? It seems to me that the skiing up here would be fantastic.
Oh, it sure would be. The problem is the enormous cost it would be to keep the road to Sidewinder open. It's a 25-mile stretch of road. It gets an average of 20 feet of snow during the winter, and there's no way to make it economically feasible to keep it clear. When the place was built in 1907, there was very little interest in winter sports, and this site was chosen for its seclusion and scenic beauty.
I will quickly interject to show that the eagle we can see in the window has been highlighted in the mirrored versions.
When the place was built in 1907, there was very little interest in winter sports, and this site was chosen for its seclusion and scenic beauty.
Well, it's certainly got plenty of that.
That's right. Did they give you any idea in Denver about what the job entails?
Only in a very general way.
Well, The winters can be fantastically cruel. The basic idea is to cope with the very costly damage and depreciation which can occur. And this consists mainly of running the boiler, heating different parts of the hotel on a daily rotating basis, repairing damage as it occurs, doing repairs so the elements can't get a foothold. That sounds fine to me. Physically, it's not a very demanding job. The only thing that can get a bit trying up here during the winter is a tremendous sense of isolation.
So we can see Jack Torrance goes in for his interview, and we can see a Stanley Kubrick production with an eagle on top of the earth with a striking resemblance to the Apollo 11 logo. And to finish this scene, Jack says, 5 months of peace is just what I want, and the music stops.
It consists mainly of running the boiler, heating different parts of the hotel on a daily rotating basis, repairing damage as it occurs, doing repairs so the elements can't get a foothold. That sounds fine to me. Physically, it's not a very demanding job. The only thing that can get a bit trying up here during the winter is a tremendous sense of isolation. Well, that just happens to be exactly what I'm looking for. I'm outlining a new writing project. 5 months of peace is just what I want. That's very good, Jack.
All the clips I'm about to show come from this start point. I have not chopped and cut things together. So looking at the video timeline, you can clearly see I start 2001: A Space Odyssey when the intro credits and the ending credits finish. Going back to the documentary Room 237, it also mentions superimposing the screens on top of each other. I wanted to see what it would look like if I did that with The Shining and 2001: A Space Odyssey.
So those superimpose make it kind of make it seem like a postcard, like an invitation, like come to the July 4th ball here in Crater Lake.
So on one screen we can see an Apollo 11 rocket taking off, and on the opposite screen we can see flames and a moon. What happens when we put these two things together?
Mom? Mom?
So, I've only showed 3 slides so far, and what do we have? A screen which shows a note in Jack Torrance's hand, and on the mirrored screen it says the interview. We see Jack Torrance walk into an office with someone who looks extremely like JFK, and then we see an eagle on top of the Earth with a striking resemblance to the Apollo 11 badge, but with the Earth instead of the moon. And we also have an Apollo 11 rocket taking off with fire under the rockets going to the moon. This is only the beginning of the video, and there are many more things, much clearer and much more vivid, which will help convince you that this was all intentional. Before continuing, I will be showing 2 extracts from 2 different books by 2 different authors. It will help demonstrate how deliberate and intentional everything is placed in each scene, and it will also show how much control he had in the filming even when he was not present on set. The first example will be from the Stanley Kubrick Encyclopedia. It reads, "A grid was placed over the TV screen, and by taping various artist positions, the distances could be transferred to the TV grid to allow the artists a certain flexibility of movement while keeping them in focus. This is one example of many that illustrate the lengths to which Kubrick and his collaborators would go in order to achieve the results he wanted." This is one example from the Kubrick archives, which shows the type of instructions Stanley Kubrick would leave his crew when he is not present at filming. The second example will come from a biography done by Vincent Libruto. I was only able to find an Italian copy online, so I had to purchase an English copy myself. The Google translation was good enough, but here is what it looks like in the English version. Kubrick never left home in England to conceive the German sequences. He studied countless photos taken on location in Germany by teams of photographers. Kubrick determined exactly how the second unit crew would film the shots he wanted when they were dispatched on location. This was the same process that he had used on 2001 for the Dawn of Man backgrounds. Kubrick had developed an elaborate system of utilising a numbered and lettered grid on photographs so he could direct his second unit crew by phone. With mathematical precision, he calculated a shot's composition by giving the crew the coordinates from the photographic grid. So, as we can clearly see, Kubrick had mapped his films to that of a chessboard.
Yeah, looks like you're right. I resigned.
Thank you for a very enjoyable game.
Yeah, thank you.
So with this in mind, I hope this analogy makes sense. Many people did not like 2001 and The Shining, and there are accounts of hundreds of people walking out of the theatres when they were being shown it for the first time.
It got very mixed reviews. It was not the iconic film that it has now become. There were a lot of bad reviews for this film.
Stanley told me that when they first showed it in Washington for the sort of politicos, there was a guy from MGM at the back with a clicker. And Stanley was, "What are you doing?" He goes, I'm counting how many people leave. And there was like 380 left the movie. Just didn't get it.
And that's because it was like watching one side of a chess game. They were only seeing 50% of the pieces that were meant to be on the board.
He told me that his favorite part of filmmaking is editing, because in the editing room, that's where the film comes to life, and he loved editing.
He was trying things out. He had little models of things, and he was lighting them. And he would travel with a flashlight and then get it lit properly. He liked to play with that and had some good ideas of how to get scenes very logically constructed and visually very nice by playing with his little paper dolls.
Stanley found out that I was on the same lot that he was preparing The Shining. And he took me on a tour of the sets, I had never seen anything quite like it before. Then Stanley showed me how he planned his shots. He had a Nikon still camera, and he had rigged a periscope that went from the lens straight down. So when he took me into a miniature version of all the sets of the Overlook Hotel, he could put that little periscope down into the set, and he could basically take a lot of pictures and plan where his camera was going. So I had a real tutorial that first day I went to Elstree from the great master himself.
You know, that was an excellent speech you gave us, Haywood. It certainly was.
Tony?
I'm sure it beefed up morale a hell of a
I'm
lot.
scared.
Oh, by the way, I wanted to say to both of you, I think you've done a wonderful job. I appreciate the way you've handled this thing. Well, the way we look at it...
Remember what Mr. Halloran said.
We're only too happy to be able to oblige.
It's just like pictures in a book, Danny. It isn't real.
When we first found it, we thought it might be an outcrop of magnetic rock, but all the geological evidence was against it.
After Danny says it's just like pictures in a book and it isn't real, we see on the opposite screen a collection of photographs of the moon. If we look closer at these photos, at the bottom corner we can see they are categorized similar to how the Apollo mission photos were also categorized. When analysing The Shining, in the storeroom, or story room as it is called, we can find numbers which match the official Apollo photos.
Now, this is the storeroom. You got a dozen jugs of black molasses. We got 60 boxes of dry.
Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Morse code, but could you bring the camera closer in here, please?
you need to reverse the numbers to get the photo which we are going to talk about. Here we can see one of the photos referenced in the film on the official NASA website. As we can see in this photograph, there are 3 distinct light streaks which appear in the image. Other people who have been critical of the media NASA has produced over the years has pointed out this discrepancy. There should be nothing in space to produce 3 light streaks like this. NASA has not commented on this discrepancy. Going back to the scene in which Danny says it isn't real and it's just like pictures in a book, we can see another continuity error occur. As we can see, there are only 2 lights suspended in the hallway, yet in the window reflection we can see 3 distinct light streaks. And as we have already learnt, purposeful errors left inside one's work can be a key that opens doors.
Come and play with us. Come and play with us, Danny. Forever and ever and ever. Tony, I'm scared.
Remember what Mr. Halloran said. It's just like pictures in a book, Danny. It isn't real.
The uncanny, he said, is the only emotion, or the only feeling, which for most people is more powerfully experienced in art or literature than in life. Perhaps justification of the genre, for whatever value it is. It is an interesting point.
We can also see that there has been 3 dots placed by the axe which also mimic or replicate this 3 distinct light streak pattern.
Remember what Mr. Halloran said. It's just like pictures in a book, Danny. It isn't real.
Innovation means, moving it forward, but not abandoning the classical form, the art form that you're working on. But I do think the real explosion will come when someone finally liberates the narrative structure.
What surprises me is that you have absolutely no prejudice towards choice of a subject. I mean, anything can happen.
I might, but I'm not aware of it. I mean, a good story that you make in a film is a miracle. And, it's very hard to work miracles.
Going back to the point of the Disney dopey sticker missing off the door. This massive continuity error could not have been overlooked. It was done on purpose for a reason, and now I will show you why. If you line up 2001: A Space Odyssey with The Shining as I've shown, you will see why the dopey sticker disappears from the door.
I'm sure she'll be absolutely fascinated when I tell her about it. She's a confirmed ghost story and horror film addict.
Tony, do you think Dad'll get the job?
He already did. He's gonna phone Wendy up in a few minutes to tell her.
A confirmed ghost story and horror film addict.
Tony, do you think Dad'll get the job?
He already did. He's gonna phone Wendy up in a
Coincidence?
few
I
minutes to
think
tell
not!
her.
If Stanley was afraid of anything,
was of making these kind of mistakes, whereby you get carried away without checking thoroughly. There was a chess player in him. You could say maybe that's why he took so long between films.
In this scene we have Danny approaching room 237. In 2001, we can see the astronauts are on the moon and they are looking back at the Earth, which would be 237,000 miles away. Both the Earth and 237 are overlapped. On this scene, you will see fire under the rockets, or the tapestries, and you will also see an airplane taking off. While these two things are happening, in 2001, the spokesman is talking about an embarrassing cover story, and he understands the need for absolute secrecy.
Created to give the impression there's an epidemic at the base. I understand that beyond it being a matter of principle, many of you are troubled by the concern and anxiety this story of an epidemic might cause to your relatives, friends on Earth. Well, I completely sympathize with your negative views. I found this cover story personally embarrassing myself. However, I accept the need for absolute secrecy in this. I hope you will too. Now, I'm sure you're all aware of the extremely grave potential for cultural shock and social disorientation contained in this present situation, if the facts were prematurely and suddenly made public without adequate preparation and conditioning.
Dr. Floyd, have you any idea how much longer this cover story will have to be maintained?
I don't know, Bill. I suppose it'll be maintained as long as deemed necessary by the council. And of course there must be adequate time for a full study to be made of the situation before any thought can be given to making a public announcement.
Calling KDK1.
Oh yes, as some of you already know, the council has requested that formal security oaths be obtained in writing from everyone who has any knowledge of this event.
In 2001, A Space Odyssey, we will hear Hal say that the problem is caused by human error. In The Shining, we can see the butler spill a drink on Jack Torrance. This seems to be a clear representation of a human error. So this is another scene again where two things are being shown and said at the same time.
Are you quite sure?
Yeah. I'm so sorry, sir.
How would you account for this discrepancy between you and the Twin 9000?
Well, I don't think there is any question about it. It can only be attributable to human error. This sort of thing has cropped up before, and it has always been due to human error.
We'll get some water to it, sir.
In this next scene, we can see another massive continuity error. We can see Stanley Kubrick has placed wind vents behind Jack Torrance and removed them during takes. So this is telling us that wind is being blown into the studio. When we overlap this with 2001, we can see a flag being blown as if it was being blown by the wind. It once again gives us a striking resemblance to an Apollo discrepancy.
Get a lot written today?
Yes.
Hey, the weather forecast said it's gonna snow tonight.
What do you want me to do about it?
Come on, hon. Don't be so grouchy.
I'm not being grouchy. I just want to finish my work.
Okay, I understand. I'll come back later on with a couple of sandwiches for you, and maybe you'll let me read something then.
Wendy, let me explain something to you.
Well, I know you will. Well, I know you will.
In this scene, when we overlap the videos, we can see that the spacecraft looks like it's heading on towards a collision with the car. Immediately after the spacecraft and the car would collide, it pans to the left and shows you the red VW Beetle smashed up in a wreckage. In the words of the commentator, Kubrick is saying a big F you to Stephen King. In this scene, when we overlap the videos, we can see that the spacecraft looks like it's heading on towards a collision with the car. Immediately after the spacecraft and the car would collide, it pans to the left and shows you the red VW Beetle smashed up in a wreckage. In the words of the commentator, Kubrick is saying a big F you to Stephen King.
When The Shining was released, the response was mixed. Some people appreciated its riddles and ambiguities. Others felt that Kubrick had strayed too far from Stephen King's book.
The deviations drove Stephen King out of his mind. He just ranted and ranted for years how much he hated The Shining, and he hated it because he'd given Kubrick all this great source material, and Kubrick threw it out. And the whole idea of this is best exemplified by the scene where Dick Halloran is driving up the highway trying to get to the Overlook during a winter storm, and he passes a wreck, and in the wreck a semi has crashed and crushed a red Volkswagen. And this is a direct message from Kubrick to King, because in the novel Jack Torrance's car is a red Volkswagen, but in the movie it's a yellow Volkswagen. And what Kubrick is saying in that scene is a big F you to Stephen King. He's saying, this is my vehicle, I have wrecked your vehicle, and everybody in the world can see it. And this drove King crazy, and it should have. But what was really going on, and what is just much more deliciously fascinating about all of this, is that in fact Kubrick was faking the making of the Stephen King novel in order to reveal the idea of what he went through to do the Apollo moon footage.
No other being has ever had the might, nay, the nobility, to wield not one, but two infinity stones. The universe lies within your grasp.
For the past 4 years, I believe the trail ended there. The reason being is that the public has never seen Stanley Kubrick's version of Eyes Wide Shut. Stanley Kubrick died 6 days after showing his final cut of Eyes Wide Shut to the executives at Warner Brothers.
On March 1st, 1999, after almost 3 years from the beginning of filming, Kubrick finishes the first edit of Eyes Wide Shut and shows it to Cruise, Kidman, and Warner Brothers executives.
When Eyes Wide Shut was finally shown for the very first time in New York on March 1st, 1999, to Tom and Nicole and the heads of the studio, the response was very enthusiastic. Stanley was very, very happy, and a great heavy weight was lifted from his shoulders.
We are then told that Kubrick did not finish a final cut, and they tasked Leon Vitali to cut down the version that he had left us.
The studio was in shock for a while, because Stanley, when he was making the film and getting it ready for delivery as a finished piece of work, as a finished film to the studio, that part of it was now missing. So there was Leon Vitali, who was the key factor in all of this. He'd been through the process of making the film.
Was it easy?
No. While he was alive, we fought the battles, of course we did, but he was there, and everything was about him. Now it was about what everybody thought he was about.
If even 5 seconds was cut from Eyes Wide Shut, it would ruin any type of crossover or multi-screened film which Kubrick was attempting to make. With the reported 20 minutes cut by Leon Vitali, any hope of fitting in Eyes Wide Shut would have been lost. I then tried the remaining of Kubrick's films to see if any interacted the same way The Shining and 2001 A Space Odyssey did. Through rigorous trial and error, I came to the conclusion that it was only these 2 films of Kubrick's which interacted in this way. I firmly believe Eyes Wide Shut would have been the final piece of this puzzle, but as Stanley's final cut has been locked away, I am unable to test the hypothesis with it. It wasn't until making this video that the thought crossed my mind that maybe when Stanley was alive, he reached out to either friends or colleagues to help collaborate on this project. Similar to how Stanley Kubrick wrote and produced Steven Spielberg's film AI, which he goes completely uncredited for. Similar to the work he did with Ken Adams on the set of James Bond, Kubrick was happy to do the work in secret. Well, maybe not happy, but he understood out of necessity it had to be this way. Made in 1997, the film Wag the Dog features a plot which we are becoming all too familiar with. Similar to Dark Side of the Moon, it starts with the American government going to a Hollywood producer's house, whose name happens to be Stanley, who also happens to be 5'6". The government asks Stanley in helping producing a fake war to help secure votes in the next election. If you swap the word war for moon landing in this film, you will have the exact same plot as Dark Side of the Moon. I do not wish to spoil the ending, but it is worth noting that the main conflict in this film is the fact that Stanley, the film producer, wants to take credit for the work he did for the American government. Upon learning that Stanley wants to take credit for the work he has done, the American government murders him. Both Wag the Dog and Be In There interact the way we have already seen 2001 and The Shining interact. You do not need to take my word for it. I have given you all the tools you need to recreate this and check for yourself. For obvious reasons to some, I am unable to upload the full 2-hour version uncut. I have previously tried to do this, for it to be removed immediately under copyright infringement. I am not cherry picking scenes out of this, and will find some way of uploading the full version uncut, for those unable to recreate it using their own video editing software. Even if I have to split it into parts, or find an alternative video hosting platform. So, to summarise, we have learned Stanley Kubrick is one of the most praised and decorated artists of our time. He is even considered a genius to many. He was a devoted fan of code breaking, which is displayed by his interest in the book The Code Breakers. When aligning his films in a very simple but deliberate way, it seems to convey a clear message about the Apollo 11 moon mission. The way that this was done was by using things learnt in the book The Code Breakers. And to top it off, there has been multiple series and professional documentaries on his involvement with the moon landing, with some productions boasting names such as Henry Kissinger and Buzz Aldrin. I've tried to be respectful of your time. I hope I've been able to convey this information concisely without it feeling too rushed. As I said, this is only a small portion of the film. I will find a way to upload a full version uncut.
He was a man who is completely unique. He's a man I loved and admired. with all the difficulties he had with him. He was not an easy person. It didn't matter. I mean, you know, obviously I worked with him for 30 years for good reasons.
Stanley is gone. There's never going to be another Kubrick film. You will never have a film that will look like this ever again, because it is Stanley.
He just didn't grouse about it or bitch or write lousy editorials. He converted it into something that was amazing and important for us as a species.
He was a very passionate, loving, concerned husband, father, dog owner, employer. He was probably one of the most caring people I've ever met. If it was in his power to do something to help somebody who needed it, or an animal who needed it, he would be there. And he would always try. Yeah, not many like him. So, I miss him. I miss him a lot.
When he was dead, I really suffered. I didn't have his voice to give me the rundown on what he thought. Anything that he ran across, he was very interested, and intensely so. And it sounds like such a cliche, but he was really engaged in life, every part of it. That kind of energy and enthusiasm and intensity made him very different from other people to me. He was brilliant. He was unique. He was Stanley Kubrick.